We are on page 32. Rabbeinu Avraham had referenced his father's teaching that we should not serve Hashem in order to receive a reward. The Rambam in his commentary on Pirkei Avot, you can buy these at any Sfarim store. I don't know if they sell them in America, but I found them in Israel. And it's the Rashi on Pirkei Avot, the Rambam on Pirkei Avot, Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerondi on Pirkei Avot, and Rabbeinu Ovadia of Bartanura on Pirkei Avot. The old commentaries on Pirkei Avot.
What's the book called?
It's called Pirushei HaRishonim, the commentaries of the Rishonim on Pirkei Avot. The Rambam doesn't write so much on Pirkei Avot because he has an 8-chapter introduction to Pirkei Avot, and essentially anything he needs to say about Pirkei Avot he already said. He just writes little snippets. So this Mishnah is different. He goes out of his way to write a few things about fear of heaven. And the first is he mentions the difference in a prize, and a sachar. The difference in a reward and a payment. So sometimes a person will tell his kid, "Go get me something. I'll give you a piece of chocolate." He doesn't have to give him a piece of chocolate, but he does. It's like a reward. Yeah. Sachar is like a salary. Someone calls you up. I need you to come do something for me in my office. Something you know how to do. So you have a fee that you charge to do this. Yeah. That's a sachar. You're deserving of that. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you normally do and expect to get what you should get. But when it's talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does he owe you? What can you really demand from Hashem?
Everything.
Nothing. You can't demand anything from Hashem. I mean, it's like a slave. A slave, we don't get a salary when you're a servant. You do what you do. That's your job.
We are not slaves to it, huh?
Sure we are.
No, we call them so many ways, so many different relations.
But first and foremost, we're his slaves. We're also his children. Sure. But we don't. Hashem doesn't pay us a salary at the end of the month. It's not that he doesn't owe us something.
He pays in different ways.
He rewards us perhaps, but doesn't pay us. Someone who pays you is because they owe you something. There's a difference between being rewarded for something. For example, if somebody, let's say somebody helps you a lot at your kid's bar mitzvah. So what do? You give them a gift card to some store. That's not a payment for what they did. Your $30 gift card isn't going to pay them back. It's a gift. It's a reward. It's like, thank you for helping me out.
It's a token.
Right, exactly. So Hashem gives us all kinds of, but He doesn't owe us. So it's not like Hashem, I kept Shabbat, I ate kosher, how come you don't do for me? David HaMelech says, Ma ashiv Hashem, kol tagmulo yanai. What can I give back to Hashem? Everything Hashem, if I do the math right now, everything Hashem did for me in my life. Everything Hashem gave, let me come to this world, He took care of me, He fed me, He saved my life. What money can I pay Hashem back with? How am I going to pay Hashem back? We are forever indebted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This has to be put into our bones that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does more for us. There was once a kid who came and says, I want to repay you for everything. Parents always hold over their kids' head. I raised you, I sent you to private schools, and look, how can you do this to me? So one because I want to pay you back. So his parents started doing the math. All the food, the years of rent, electricity, water, clothing. Forget the love and attention and the trips to Disneyland or whatever else it was. This kid in his whole life isn't going to be able to pay him back. And that's a parent. The parent didn't give life; he gave a quality of life, but not life itself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does even more than that. Rabbeinu Harambam though mentions that there's a problem with this mentality, and that it's very easily misunderstood. If I should not serve Hashem in order to receive a reward, it's because there's a very high level of connection to Hashem. I'm really close. I don't want anything. I just want to be good to you. They say that when a couple is dating with each other, so they'll, sure, I'll go Shabbat to your parents. Sure, I'll visit. The moment they get married, why am I always going to your parents' house for Shabbat? Why am I always? What changed? What changed was in the beginning you would do anything in the world to impress the other person. But now that they're already in your pocket, you don't feel like you need to impress them anymore. We're forever with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on that level of we will do whatever it takes to keep HaKadosh Baruch Hu around. The Rambam mentions the following thing. He says that fear of Hashem, awe of Hashem, is actually a very good character trait. It's not a good end, meaning you shouldn't always just fear Hashem. But there's a part of it that says, somebody who loves Hashem so much could very easily forget about fulfilling Hashem's will. I love Hashem, Hashem loves me, don't worry, He'll forgive me if I don't eat kosher today. Because your buddy's with Hashem. somebody has a certain fear of Hashem, he knows that Hashem's not going to forgive him today for eating something not kosher. He also lacks, though, the positive side of Judaism. The Rambam says you need both. The Rambam says that this rabbi who taught this Mishnah, his name was Antignos Ish Socho. We mentioned him, Antignos of Socho. He had 2 students. And his students ended up making the Rambam's life very difficult. And I'll tell you why. This rabbi had... Zev, do you mind closing the door, please? This rabbi had 2 students. Shem Echad Tzadok. One of them's name was Tzadok. V'Shem Hasheni Baitos. And the second one was Baitos. Tzadok and Baitos. And you hear of 2 people called Tzedukim, the Sadducees, and the Baitusim, those who were students of Baitos. And these movements were movements that ended up fighting against the oral law. You know, Tzedukim are the precursors to the Kehillat movement. They came much later. The Rambam said they didn't start off as people who didn't believe in the oral law. In fact, they were students of the oral law. But what happened? Kasher shamu shamar zeh ma'amar. When they heard the Rabbi Antignos say this teaching, don't serve Hashem in order to receive a reward, yatzu min fanav v'amar ha'echad l'chavaro. They left him and they each told each other, Hine harav amar befirush. Our Rabbi told us explicitly, she'en la'adam lo gmul v'lo onesh v'en tikva klal. Our Rabbi said there's no such thing as reward, there's no such thing as consequences, and there's no hope for, there's no reason to keep the Torah mitzvah. Our Rabbi said don't serve Hashem to receive a reward, because there is no reward. They didn't understand that what he meant was that's not the reason why you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Instead, they understood it. He was discrediting. I once heard our parents make a similar statement, something similar to what I said yesterday. The mitzvot are so good for you in this world. Don't even worry about the next world. Just focus right now on doing the mitzvot because they're better for you in this world.
Otherworldly focus tends to, as we see, produce a lot of problems.
Very good. And that's where our friends was coming from. Somebody wanted to say, oh, you see, the rabbi doesn't believe in Gan Eden. And they mentioned something along that lines in a class once, and our fellows blew up. I said, what do you mean? What are you, a kofar? Are you a heretic? I said, all I'm telling you is that even in this world, the Torah mitzvot make your life. You don't even have to do it for a reward. Just realize how much it enhances your world when the world is connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says here, V'samach echad mehen yidei chavero v'yatzu min haklal. And they each held onto each other's hands, Tzadok and Baitos, and they left the Jewish people, v'hinichu HaTorah, and they left the path of Torah observance. Hitabra le'echad kat achad v'lechavero kat acheret. And they each created their own little communities of people who followed them. Ukra'um hachachamim tzadukim u'vaitosim. The Chachamim called them tzadukim and baitusim. וכאשר לא היו יכולים לקבץ הקהילות לפי מה שהגיע להם מן אמונה, שזאת האמונה הרעה תפריד הנקבצים, כל שכן שלא תקבץ הנפרדים, says they had a very quick problem. The problem was that in a world that believes in anarchy, that there's no reward and consequence, it's very hard to build a community. And the Rambam says, just a historical fact was, both of these people had a very hard time keeping their community a community. He said, this is not a conducive way of life for keeping people together. He said it's definitely not a conducive way of life for attracting new people. He said it just like it doesn't keep those who are close, it definitely doesn't make those who are far closer. The Rambam says it ruined their communities. These 2 scholars decided that they had to change their trick. They had to come up with a different understanding. Why is it that we don't perform Torah mitzvot the way everyone else does? Says the Rambam, they chose to attack something which was very easy to attack, and that was the oral law. They decided to say, no, we believe in the Torah. We just don't believe in those rabbis the way they interpret it. See, we were rabbis once upon a time too. We know how they speak. We know how they talk. And that gathered a very large population, says the Rambam. The Rambam says that's where the movement, this idea of going against the oral law, didn't originally come from a place of not believing in the oral law. It came from a place of, well, we don't believe in the Torah in the first, we don't believe in the concept of reward and consequence. And it ended up they had to market it differently. And this is perhaps one of the first times in Jewish history you find people change their marketing tactics to attract the crowd, and they were very successful. And says the Rambam, "Ume'az yetzu elu akitot ra'ot," these groups scattered, "v'karu be'elu ha'artzot r'tzono mar Mitzrayim." He said, and they're called in these countries, Egypt, Karaim, Keretz, u'shmotam tel chachamim tzadukim u'vaitusim. And these are the same people the sages referred to as tzadukim and baitusim. So when Rabbeinu Avraham is telling us, don't serve Hashem in order to receive a reward. Like Antignos Ish Sochol. He's not telling you because there is no reward. He's telling you that's just not the reason for why you do it. That's not the loftiest path in serving Hashem. It's important to know, Pirkei Avot is it's a problematic text. And I'll tell you why it's problematic. Jews love it, myself included. Most people lack a basic understanding of what is Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is a book that is referred to in rabbinic literature as Milta de Chasiduta, words of piety. Meaning, these are not things that everyone must follow. If they needed to be followed, they would have been written in the code of Jewish law. But they're not. These are not codified in the books of Jewish law because you don't have to do them. These are extras. These are things that are on a higher path. You could choose to do these things. And when we try to push people to follow Pirkei Avot as opposed to following Jewish law, then we're pushing people to do things they might not really be ready to do, and it can create a very big imbalance in the community.
Like not talk too much with your wife.
Very good. And this understanding that he was talking to about not with his woman, which means his wife, it's a hard concept for us to understand in the first place. But
we are bringing that topic.
No, imagine.
What's that?
Talk to women is
No, imagine that there's a certain there's a certain level of such connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it doesn't separate a husband and wife. It unites them at a different level. That's not talking. It's not chatter. It's not, let's talk about the neighbors and what happened at shul, and let's talk about.
But that's different. That's not like a restriction. Like, I can't talk to you right now. It's more like you sew together that.
Yes, it's a natural. Words. Very good, and that's why these things are not. You can't just adopt them in your life. They're things that have to. They're worked up to, and they're not necessarily goals. Meaning, a person may never reach this goal. It's something that naturally will happen and won't happen. You're adults in this room. There's a problem in the Jewish world when Jewish couples get married and they go to Chatan and Kala classes and they study all kinds of things, and some of the things are important for them to know, and some of the things, it's a problem when Judaism is taught by ignoramuses. It's a big problem. And very often the people who do teaching, and they're not qualified to teach, they're not licensed to teach, but they're not rabbis of kashrut, they're just kashrut supervisors. They're not people who can perform weddings, they just prepare couples for weddings. It's like this gray area of, I don't really know if you're qualified to do what it is you think you know how to do. Mm. And these people have their own little world of traditions and ideas and suggestions that at the very least turn people off from living a Jewish lifestyle, and at the very worst can bring in some very terrible ideas. And
it's like the paralegals and the nurse practitioners.
Right, and I'm not taking away from them and what they know or don't know.
Physical therapist trying to do acupuncture.
Yeah. But it's like the second class teachers that have now become their own little, and rabbis don't have a way to regulate what they're being taught in these Chatan and Kala classes, and there are movements which they try.
It helps.
What helps?
Chatan and Kala class.
Of course it helps. A couple has to know how to live together, how to be. But some of these people are crazy. Some of these people have bad marriages themselves. They're training the rest of the world to have a bad marriage also.
Like the psychologists.
Yeah, right. There's always two people who go to be psychologists. Those who want to help people, and those who are crazy themselves. They need a psychologist. It's
help themselves.
Yeah, it's like why are so many marriage counselors I know divorced?
It's true. Really
so many marriage counselors that I know are divorced.
It's a long.
Clearly, they don't know. Like, why am I going to you for advice if it didn't?
A long time like that. It's not new.
And I have my own criticisms of perhaps analyzing, reading things into people which aren't really there in the first place. I have my own perceptions and understandings of this world, but suffice it to say that in the Jewish world we have our own second-tier teachers that have become their own thing almost.
Can I tell you a little soundbite from my past marriage counseling experience? There's a woman, and she was doing marriage counseling in my past marriage. She came over and sat in my lap. Big lap? And said, "This is how your wife feels." Restrained. That's good to say in my life. I was so embarrassed.
Is a Jewish lady or like a
Jewish lady?
Okay.
It was effective at something.
I didn't go back.
And the thing
I was
is,
religious then.
No, it's not how she feels. She's lighter.
Now in halakha, in the Shulchan Aruch, there are all kinds of things that are suggested for a husband and a wife certain levels of
Crown
kedusha.
Heights? It happened Crown Heights?
Crown Heights, sure.
Certain levels of kedusha that are supposed to be reached or hope to be reached, and ideals that are in the bedroom, in the private life, and the problem with teaching ideals to people who are 18, 19, 20, 21 is that at this age they're not really ready for the most idealistic way of living life. Not in a bad way, in a way that this is the kind of thing that if they will ever reach, they must reach together. It can't be that a wife went to some college class and she's this is what my teacher told me and this is what my half the time that I help with these couples is I just unprogram the nonsense they've already heard and tell them, well, what your college teacher said is not really true. Well, how could you, Mrs. Goldsteinberger? She's the most famous college teacher in the whole world. Yeah, and the truth is that she might be the most famous college teacher in the whole world, but she doesn't know what she's talking about. In any case, I was teaching a boy for his wedding, and I like to make sure when they get married in San Diego. So my wife teaches the kala, and I teach the groom, and we're all on the same page. We're all learning the same stuff. In this situation, she had a teacher, this boy didn't. I came in to help him out. It wasn't in San Diego. And I was talking to him, the college teachers are very organized. They have slideshows and PDF documents. So maybe she could just share it with us. We'll go over what they're studying. And I can't tell you mistakes in halakha that are grave mistakes in halakha. This lady she's a licensed college teacher, but she has no idea what she's talking about.
Is it based on minhagim?
No, it's based on the fact that she doesn't have a very good Hebrew vocabulary when she translates Shulchan Aruch. I wish it was like a customs thing. Like in that community, they were so strict. It wasn't that. She was strict about things that were not there, and lenient about things that Hashem Shemo, the person should be lenient about. And just the people need to know who it is that I'm going to study with. How did I get the college teachers, the Chatan classes? No, we got here somehow.
We were talking about Pirkei Avot.
Oh, very good. Pirkei Avot are extra levels of righteousness and piety. And when a couple decides, hey, let's try this out, this extra level of piety, but they reach that conclusion together because they learned together, because they prayed together, because they grew together, and it's something they want to try. And it's the kind of thing that if it doesn't work out for them, they're willing to go back on. That's a healthy way to try something. But if it's my college teacher, my chatan teacher, my teacher at seminary, my teacher in yeshiva told me X, Y, and Z, and we have to do it, and I don't care if it doesn't work for you, and I don't care if it's not fulfilling your emotional needs, it doesn't make a difference. That's the way it's going to be in this house. And then it gets into these things, and you find people really ruin relationships over things that are not there. They're just not there. And I've said enough. But Pirkei Avot, don't be like a servant who serves Hashem to receive a reward. Obviously this is a lofty level of serving Hashem, but if you know that you're just not there, that's not your level yet, I want to serve Hashem and I'm hoping to get a reward. It's not that you shouldn't serve Hashem if that's the way you're going to serve Him. Just know that there's room to grow, there's room to evolve out of there. Just like you tell your kid, don't cross the street, you'll get hit by a car. And you scare him, what happens if people get hit by cars? You hope his whole life he's not going to think about whatever it is you told him, and maybe that was good for that moment, but it's not something that needs. I read someone sent me an article, lies that parents tell their children. I didn't know these things were true, but the terrible things. Someone says, all those oil stains on the street, those are all little children who ran into the street without their parents telling them they could cross the street. And I read it. Why was I reading? It was in a psychological journal. How these people grow up and they really have problems with every time they see every time they see an oil stain on the street, they're afraid maybe there's a little. Now they're already adults, they went to college, they know better than this, but sometimes that negative education can really go a very long way. And Chachamim said, even if at the beginning a person is told certain things because that's what's going to get them on the program, they have to also be programmed that that's not the way they're going to be thinking forever. And the hope is that even though I serve Hashem like this now, one day, says Rabbeinu Avraham, I will serve Hashem. And what is the word that he uses? Tahara Gemura, a rigorous purity. The purity of action. I'm not doing this, I'm not afraid of punishment, I'm not looking for a reward, I'm not even looking to make, I just want to do what's truthful, what's right, because that's the truth and that's what is right. Allah Hashem, we should reach that level.